say that necessarily, but every single Muslim individual and community throughout the history from the time of the Prophet until now is a part of our collective history. So if you have a particular background from somewhere in the subcontinent or one of the Arab countries or somewhere else from the Far East, that Islam is not only about your history in those particular places and how Islam came to those particular places, because that at least theoretically, that we are one ummah, and we are like one body. That what happens in the history of the progression of Islam in the United States is just as much yours as it is mine. And that we have to know and be a part of that history. And now you're all here. And one of the things that I hope that they will teach in our schools and teach at centers like this is the history of Islam in Scotland, the history of Islam in the United Kingdom, the history of Islam in Europe. It's very important that you all know that. And that how people migrated to this country, and what happened when they migrated, and how people converted, and who and when, and how. This is very, very important. And that part of our history across the ocean is that in the year 1492, which is the year of the Spanish Inquisition, simultaneously Columbus, that he sailed west. And his navigator was a Moor, a Morisco rather, meaning that he was originally Muslim. And that the Muslims had a very powerful fleet at that time, so it's very likely, and some of the likes of like Dr. Omar, is that this is one of their goals, is to prove this, that Muslims arrived to the west, to the west, to North and South America before that even Europeans did. And someone will say, so what? Okay, so that you prove that, and this has become a reality and a fact, what does that mean? Well, part of what that means is that this whole claim now that's happening here, but also in the United States, that Muslims are foreign and Muslims are different, and this is a Christian, Judeo-Christian culture, and they're now migrating, they're going to take over, and they have too many kids, and that they don't take part in our society, and all these type of things that we hear, that it really gives us a different perspective. Because at least in the United States, Muslims have been there from the beginning. And very likely, highly probably, and you could probably say it's almost about to be a proven fact, that they were there significantly before the Europeans themselves. And that is very profound. And that there's some accounts of, in some of the histories that have been found in West Africa, of people arriving to the North and South America or the Caribbean. And there's other accounts of the journal of Christopher Columbus himself, in describing people that he saw in the New World that resembled those that he saw in Spain. And so that this is very interesting. And so that this type of rhetoric that is being created now, it gives us a very, very unique perspective. And on top of that, that if you look at the transatlantic slave trade across the United States, that at least 10%, if not 20%, of the slaves that were brought to the United States were Muslim. And I just had a class on this not too long ago in the university titled Muslims in America. And this is something that I knew before that. But to start to learn the details of their names and so forth, and how they were brought. There's a neat, do you have Netflix? Do you have something like, do you know what Netflix is? We have this thing called Netflix where you can kind of like order a video online, and then they like send it to you through the mail, or you can watch it online or something like that. There's a nice documentary titled Prince Among Slaves, where it's about this man, Prince Abdurrahman, who was a prince, and he was from, I believe, Timbuktu, and that during this whole slave trade that he was kidnapped, and that he was shipped to the United States, and he became a slave for a period of time. It's all about his plight and how he attained freedom and so forth, and that when you start learning the details of that, and the specific names of individuals and where that they were from, it gets really interesting. We have someone by the name of Omar Saleh Wright. That is a ringtone. You need to change your ringtone, Shulkin, as well. It sounds like an alarm waking you up for Fajr. There was a man by the name of Omar Saleh Bilali. That he was from the Moravi too. He was a scholar. And that he used to pray in jama'ah, in congregation on his plantation. And his slave master used to say that he never missed a fast. And it's really interesting, you know, and there's another really important book. Again, this is all in the context of the United States at this point. Of this, it's called Servants of Allah by Sylviane Diouf, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And one of the things that she proves is that one of the ideas in academia is that the Muslims came, that they lost their identity, they were assimilated into the greater culture, and there's no remnants of that left. Which is, we're finding increasingly now that although that happened in many cases, that it wasn't always the case. And so the point of this is that Muslims were there from the beginning. And that there has been an interaction of civilizations from the earliest of times, and a sharing of civilizations. And that this is a very important ideal for us as Muslims, a Quranic ideal. That where Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, we made you shu'ub, peoples, and qaba'il, tribes, in order that you may come to know one another. That is the foundation of our deen, is that coming to know one another. And that God didn't say in order that you may fight one another, in order that you may belittle one another or treat one another wrongly. No, to know one another. And that, you know, this is part of our teaching, is that in the universality of our teaching, is that there is a deep sense of cultural overlap, cultural sharing that takes place. And that with other civilizations, which is a fact, this happened, that Muslims were exposed to different civilizations from the earliest period. That we were exposed to the Greek civilization, the Egyptian civilization, the African different African civilizations. Within 120 years, 100 years from the inception of Islam, we were exposed to the Persian civilization, the Indian civilization, eventually the Chinese and Malay civilization, virtually all of the major civilizations on Earth that we were exposed to really quickly. And that is really, really important. And so we as Muslims, that it's important that we start to realize the relevance of our teachings in our own lives, but then the relevance of our teachings overall. Because that what we really need to do in the future requires that a twofold type process. That one is in terms of learning, the second is in terms of our own state of heart. And then in terms of that learning, it's also that there's two aspects of that. That there's the aspect of entrenching yourself in your tradition and learning your religion holistically from people that are giving you broad horizons so that you can understand. And this requires that a lot of the ways that things might have been taught back home or in other contexts, that has to be modified and reworked and renewed and represented in our context here. And that, you know, I really hope, and you see a bunch of beautiful things going on. I was just looking at the flyers that were out front here, that all of these beautiful different projects and endeavors, and that things that people dedicate their lives to. This is really beautiful. And, you know, if I, you know, could just have everyone here who's here today leave with one thing, it would be that each and every single one of you has something special that the person next to you doesn't have. That unfortunately we live in a society that oftentimes with systematized tests and so forth, that there's a monolithic definition of success, right? If you don't get, you know, straight A's and, you know, go to, I guess here, what, the University of Edinburgh, which is that one of the best, what's one of the better, Glasgow's better than Edinburgh?
Yes.
Okay, I don't want to get myself in trouble here. I was actually just reading an article from the New Yorker on the plane. This guy, Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote all these books. He was talking about how the U.S. News and World Report magazine has a yearly